It's my pleasure to introduce Vera Miao, Chase Joynt, Melody Cooper, Stephanie Adams-Santos, and Diana Mogollón. Thank you so much for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with Vera. I'd love for you to tell us about how Two Cents Horror Story started and how it then eventually expanded.
You know, I am a lifelong horror fan, a strong believer in psychological, character-driven horror as a really timely and sort of always artful way of getting at some of our biggest fears and biggest dreads, and particularly, obviously, with the history of Twilight Zone, you know, an incredible genre with which to openly address also some of the ills and the issues that are in the social sphere through storytelling. And so I pitched an idea for an episodic anthology series that was character driven, that was psychological horror specific, that each episode would grapple with some particular kind of issue or theme that was current and timely, and would also centralize people that, for me, growing up watching and loving horror, I didn't actually often see centered in the stories themselves. And that was it. I mean, the short version of it was, if I could get anywhere close to an updated Twilight Zone, I would be ecstatic. That's the aspiration. I don't know how close or how far we are away from that aspiration by any stretch of the imagination. It was just a goal and a benchmark. And so we started in the first iteration. It was a digital series that then ultimately got picked up by CW to go to linear. And so we are in our third season shooting right now of the linear broadcast television version of the show.
And we're going to focus on two specific episodes. And I wanted to talk about Ibeji first, and wanted to, you know, ask Melody and Stephanie some questions because they co-wrote the episode. But before that, let's show a clip.
Excuse me, doctor. My sister may have had a stroke, and we've been waiting here for almost 3 hours. And
I'm sorry, ma'am, but you have to understand, there's a triage.
I'm a nurse. I know what triage is. I also know that I've seen patients who got here after us, and yet they've been seen.
I'm going to ask you to calm down. Now, it's great that you're a nurse, but you're not a doctor.
She complained of a headache. She's been listless. Might have lost motor functioning on one side of her.
I appreciate your diligence, and when the attending comes, they will too.
You're not hearing.
She does not appear to be an emergency. They would have noted that at intake. And as a nurse, you must know there are many things which can present as a stroke. Anxiety, insomnia, drug use.
Do you really think I haven't noticed how this hospital has been treating its black patients?
I do not appreciate your insinuation. Now, your sister will have to wait her turn just like everybody else. Or you're welcome to go to another hospital, one where you feel more comfortable.
What was your inspiration for it, and what was perhaps the challenge with writing it?
Well, the real life issues that I've encountered and people that in my family and friends have encountered, especially Black women in the society when it comes to healthcare inequities. You know, I've gone through similar situations myself, and I actually just spoke to a young woman today who went through a very terrible experience with a dermatologist who didn't understand how to deal with darker skin. So it's unfortunately prevalent. And when you mentioned about the impact of COVID, while we were working on this episode, and certainly by the time we were shooting it, the impact of COVID was for us to realize that, you know, the Black and brown community was being unfairly affected by COVID. And so we were seeing these healthcare inequities play out right in front of us in a very horrible way. In addition to what we've seen in dealing with doctors and with maternal, death for Black mothers. So that really was the inspiration.
How did you kind of come to that as a starting point of that relationship between the sisters?
Well, I'll just throw in that's the Yoruba religion was something that we wanted to definitely use in this and kind of feature and dive into. And Ibeji means they're twins, and that is a kind of a spiritual beginning to the story. And I always knew that I wanted to tell the story of sisters And I think Steph and I both wanted to really dive into the idea of sisterhood, the implications for people who are related, and then the larger implications of sisterhood, I think.
Was there like
twins is such a natural, twins have such a powerful connection, and there's so much lore, especially in Yoruba traditions, about twinhood. Ibeji means twin, but it also is the name of a deity that represents twins. And so there was just so much rich lore that we could draw from there.
Yeah.
Was there ever a challenge kind of writing about the mythology, or, adding the spiritual thing, or what was the most difficult scene to put to paper?
I don't know if it was difficult. I think the mythology was the fluid part. It gave, because the racism, the racism in the episode, it's not like they're dealing with evil racists who are directly targeting them. They're almost incidental. Like the doctor is offended by the implication that he could be racist. And in the hospice, we never even get to meet the white administrator who's, not giving appropriate resources to the Black and brown workers who work there. So you see the monster gets to be a stand-in for that, and for the effects of that they have to deal with on their own, after the fact of having, been neglected by the doctor. Mm-hmm. So it actually gave us this rich place, right, Melody, to like delve into our imaginations with it. And
and it was important, I think, also that the sense that they were two women, and two Black women who were helping themselves and saving themselves. Yeah. And the hardest part for me, though, was the sister being paralyzed, because I actually, the inspiration for that is that I have paralytic dreams, where you see things but you can't move. And even now, when I watch the episode, it can kind of bring it on. So it's scary for even me.
But the beauty of the anthology and of the show is that you're able to then bring it to life in these very personal, emotional, visceral ways within this amazing, psychological horror package, right, Vera?
And there's this other part to it too. The paralysis also represents how we feel paralyzed in our lives. We feel paralyzed when we're up against an evil that we can't see, an evil that we even can see, but we can't do anything about. And then in the story, of course, you had to reach out to someone else to help fight that evil. But that paralysis, I think, is something that's psychological as well.
I think the lens of horror, particularly when it's rooted in character and emotion, and even in this clip, there's actually no quote unquote horror, but it is actually real horror. Mm-hmm. And it gives us a lens with which to acknowledge how big, how meaningful, and how fraught all of these things are, and how they make us feel. It just gives you license to just assume that depth right away.
Principal Myers?
Oh dear, this is the men's room.
I'm a boy.
You either got the equipment or you don't.
It's not that simple.
Well, maybe in the city this kind of thing flies, but around here the policy is no boys in the girls' room and no girls in the boys' room. Sounds pretty simple to me. But I'm just here to enforce the rules. Hell, maybe there's something you're not telling me. So please, feel free to use the urinal if you got what it takes.
Chase, I wanted to ask you how you got attached to directing a quote unquote horror episode.
Yeah, I'll give you the abridged summary, which is that Nick Adams at GLAAD, the head of transgender representation, was approached by the show looking for trans directors to take control of the story. And through a means of connections and friends, I landed in a room within a group of incredible humans who asked me all of my thoughts and feelings about horror. And I talked a lot about documentary and talked a lot about the ways in which I saw the script directly relating to the most urgent socio-political issues facing trans people and trans young people today. And I told them I could do it, and they believed me. And here we are.
That's amazing. And your lead actor also transitioned a year ago. So how important was it for you to tell this story with an actor who's so representative of the character? And, how does it speak to the state of TV currently?
Yeah, I think that there's two ways to answer that. One is the way in which it speaks to the state of TV, and the other is the way in which it speaks to the state of the world. It's not lost on me that our episode drops in the same year that 117 bills of anti-trans legislation have attempted to be passed, and 21 states are trying to deny trans kids healthcare. So when you start your answer from that place, then the question of who gets to represent who, when, where, and why becomes very different. And so for me, it was always a deep collaboration with James Goldman, our incredible breakout young star based in Toronto. And James and I had a lot of conversation as trans men, as people interested in art and the politics of representation, about how we could find ourselves in the story, and then what in turn we could show the world through those choices.
Stephanie, you wrote, 2 episodes that, like Chase said, very sociopolitical. How did Elliot differ from writing Ibeji?
They're from totally different worlds. Elliot's is a dark fairy tale, so it has a very different tone and language that it's using to tell the story. It has a younger character, but there is that mythic through line in both of them. And I think in Elliot, it's middle school. It's that primal, it's that dangerous primal world that is even more dangerous for Elliot than for most people. I think almost everyone can relate to some level of danger in middle school. And so they felt very different. I think it is because of the characters. They're just so wrapped around the world of those characters that they feel like totally different children.
Yeah. And, speaking about specifically the scene we just saw a clip of, do you think that this is a wake-up call for audience who might have not witnessed bullying or seen what this bullying looks like? And there is an anti-bullying movement going on, with people holding other people accountable. So this is extremely timely.
I definitely hope so. And that's the idea, is to put you in that perspective when maybe you don't have that perspective. And one of the central things that helped shape the episode for me was after sitting down with a trans friend, and she said something to me. The way she put it really stuck with me. She said, when I go into a public bathroom, and I get all those glances turning on me, I don't know if I feel like the cockroach or if their gaze feels like cockroaches crawling all over me. Mm-hmm. And that, when I was sitting with that, it was like, ooh, that's such a powerful thing. And that bathroom scene, it's so uncomfortable. It's so hard to watch that scene. My partner is also non-binary and had intense experiences in middle school and bathrooms. And, and so it's just they're crafting that scene and putting people in that perspective. It felt really important, especially for folks who haven't really thought from that perspective before, to be put in that place. And I think horror does that really well, because it makes you're so close with the lead and you feel the dangers that they feel. It's that act of empathy. There's a lot of empathy that can happen in horror.
Mm-hmm. And I think horror has always been kind of the front runner in, diversity across the board. So I guess, Diana and Vera, did you make a conscious decision to diversify, far above and below the line for the show?
Well, I would start with saying horror has not been at the forefront of representing diverse storylines or characters. So that's the opportunity and sort of the space that Vera, in creating Two Sentence, got us all very excited about. How can we really, again, center those characters and stories and worlds and feelings that we haven't seen and need to be seen and heard. So for us, and I'll let Vera speak to the creative element of it, I think from the get-go, Vera and us at the studio and all of us together are like, this is about diversity and inclusion, but it's about equity, it's about excellence. We want to create great television, great stories, and we want to make sure that all those other components that perhaps other shows or studios or whatever are like, oh, that's too hard or it's challenging, we're going to make sure we take that on, because that's very important to make sure for this industry and for the show and for everything we're doing. So absolutely above the line, below the line. From the last 3 or 4 seasons, if you include the digital, we've had nearly 35 writers and directors come through the show and be a part of this amazing journey. Right now, our entire executive producing team are, queer women. We have had several of our writers that it's their first television writing job, which is amazing. So as a platform, as a jumping off place, we are incredibly excited about that equity and access component that has to be part of the conversation, as well as the amazing creative that goes along with it. Vera, I'll let you talk about the other piece of it.
Yeah, I have to confess, I am often allergic to the word diversity. Just because I think it's sort of like any word that you say a lot over and over and over again, I think it starts to lose its meaning or the weight of its meaning. Because I didn't go in and pitch a diverse show. And I don't think of myself as a diverse person. I approached it more as a fan, in terms of, what is the kind of material that I want to see. And really the case that I made to Stage 13 was, I think that there is real untapped potential, frankly, in the horror genre, because literally just looking at what are the voices and the points of view and the perspectives immediately I think opens up a landscape of stories. The reason why I use the word centralizing a lot of the time is that it was critical to me that we weren't doing, for instance, race-blind storytelling. I actually don't quite know what that is. And so it was really about being really specific about who are the characters, what is their life like, what is the context in which they live in, and therefore what are the fears and the pressures, and the advantages and disadvantages that they carry through a journey that is hopefully primal, hopefully emotional, and hopefully has some level of catharsis at the end of it. For me, that was more of like an outside in perspective. For me, it was always inside out. These are the stories that make sense to me. They're the ones that move me. I'm interested in knowing more about different people's fears.
From a staff writer perspective, this was the first TV show that I worked on. And it was wonderful to walk into a room that had white, LGBTQ+, Latina, Black, Asian writers. And it was a relatively small room, and we all worked so well together. And I agree with Vera about the idea of diversity and using that word, which I also bristle against. But it's really about, on this show, even though we each wrote about characters that we were familiar with, all of us had input. So there was a perspective, my perspective was also brought to Elliot, and Stephanie's perspective was brought to Muerto, and we all were working together to create this broader way of looking at horror. And so it's not just about us telling specific stories, and we need to tell our stories because they need to be authentic, but that as a Black writer, I can have a perspective on telling other stories. And in the room, when we pitch and when we work together to develop and grow the stories, all of our perspectives are being considered and heard. And I really felt that in this room.
Collaboration is critical to the success of the show and to trying to tell such high stakes stories. So in the context of an episode like Elliot, not only are we carrying the weight of the current stakes for trans kids in the landscape of North America, but we're thinking about a history of moving image representation of trans and gender nonconforming subjects who are positioned as monsters and killers and liars. And so how can we also perhaps more subtly subvert what you're looking at, who you're looking at, and why? And all of those choices, as Vera's just said, come from a deep investment in point of view. And when we suture with a minoritized character, when we're with Elliot the whole way, what else do we get to see?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Diana, did you have anything to add?
No, I'm glad that's exactly what I was going to say. The collaboration is sort of through and through, from the production team, the writer's room, the directors. And again, in an anthology, we do have usually a director for every episode. And there's a lot of intention behind the pairing and how do we make sure that we're going to really bring out and maximize each of the stories, to Vera's point. And literally it's iterating up to the point that we're actually shooting. And even, as we all know in post, we're always fine tuning and crystallizing to make sure that we're, as we say, stick the landing. So we make sure that the intended theme and the way we want to hit there is we're doing it in the right way.
Interesting. And Chase, I kind of wanted to go back to you and Elliot, because you say you're, like I mentioned, you're not this diehard horror fan, but I felt like your episode also incorporated a lot of, horror, like shots, like the creeping up behind you and, all these like horror images that we've all come to know and love. So how did you kind of blend those, not being a huge fan of the genre in general? And what was also the most difficult scene for you to shoot?
Mm-hmm. So when I first read the script, it's very obvious that the horror is the A-level horror is transphobia, and the very close B-level horror is surveillance, right? And the threat of being seen. Right. And so as soon as I identified that we were going to be with Elliot, and then think like, what are all the institutional and political systems that surveil trans bodies and inhibit their abilities to thrive? These are schools, these are hospitals, these are governments. And so when you start thinking in that way, where does the creep come from? Who is the camera in each of the scenes? And so it started to really help me justify my perhaps more classically horror genred choices. In terms of difficulty, I can speak to the clip that we just watched, the scene where Elliot walks into the bathroom. Once we had locked our angles and figured out our flow, I ran it as a series, which is to say that I didn't cut between takes. And so it was this incredibly quiet, intense environment where James would walk out of that bathroom, connect with me, make eye contact, we would make tiny revisions, and he would go back in. And there was this moment where he walked out and kind of under his breath was like, I hate that guy, And I was like, exactly, of course. And so like, we're thinking about the weight of, institutional surveillance. We're thinking about transphobia. We're thinking about patriarchy. We're thinking about white supremacy. We're thinking about these big, influential, hot topics when we start talking about like diversity and themes, but they're not hot topics or about diversity or themes when you're thinking about them and rooting them through the lived experience of your character. And that for me was the connective thread throughout.
Is this how you're going to approach, your new episode that you're shooting? I don't know what the topic is, but is that kind of like what you're taking to the next season as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That and a whole bunch of tricks that I learned along the way.
Like what?
That's for the next conversation, Beatrice.
Exactly. We'll talk about Emmy season for season 3.
There you go. There you go. This is an amazing team. I'm just like, it just makes me so proud. Like amazing vision, creatives, passion, intentionality. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better, more passionate, dedicated team to work with and to really see the results of your fruit, the fruits of your labor, at the end of the day, and understand what the meaning of that is. It's just not another TV show, right? It's a lot more than that. So thank you to all of you. Thank you, Vera, Stephanie, Melody, Chase.
If you guys want to catch up on, anything you missed, go on the TheWrap.com screenings tab and you will be able to catch up. And there's more information in the scroll bar below. Thank you all so much. This was such a pleasure. So much fun. Always great talking about horror.